Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for being on our podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be here.
So, as always, I want to start off our conversation with introducing you to our audience. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself and how you even became a TVI?
Sure. So, I am a teacher of students with visual impairments, a certified orientation mobility specialist, and a certified low vision therapist. I've been in the field over 14 years. I'm at 14 and a half right now. And my journey to get here, I think, as a lot of us, we have interesting stories of why we got drawn to this field. So I have high functioning low vision as a result of nystagmus. And when I was 15, I began volunteering at a day camp for kids who were blind or had visual impairments. So I loved that. I think I did 13 consecutive years of that. And I had that in the back of my mind as something that just was really interesting and special to me to get to see those kids thrive and get to be a part of it. So then I went on and had a lot of interests. So I didn't commit to VI in undergrad and actually majored in business, but kept VI in the back of my mind. And I took the opportunity the year after I graduated to do a full-time volunteer corps in a charter school studying for kids who are refugees and immigrants in Atlanta. And that was positive because that confirmed to me day to day that I wanted to work with kids, because we all know that somebody might love kids for a few hours, but you need to make sure you want to do it every day of the school year. So after that, I applied to do my master's and pursue this career.
That's incredible. And what is something that you learned about yourself while you were working with the students at the day camp?
I think it was great to just see what we say all the time, that they can do anything if, or nearly anything if we adapt it. And that was really fun to see. Like, for example, we had BB gun shooting with a sound source underneath the target. And we had one camper who shot what we decided was the blind bullseye, which was he actually shot the sound box. So it was definitely fun to see growth. And I think it helped me process my visual impairment. As a kid and a teenager, I didn't have the most healthy understanding of it and willingness to share about it. And so I certainly think that beginning to work with other people with visual impairments helped me begin to draw out of my shell regarding that and feel confident.
I can imagine that. When you were growing up, did you attend a day camp for people who had visual impairments?
No, when I started working this camp, it was actually the first year of that camp. It was called Camp Can Do. There's a couple of them around, but this was Camp Can Do at Amon Carter YMCA in Fort Worth. Coincidentally, though, I had a deep connection with that particular camp facility. I had attended 4 years as a resident camper as part of other typical resident camp weeks. So it just kind of seemed meant to be.
Yeah. So when you were growing up as a person with a visual impairment and one that I would say to the typical world outside of our world, you could be passing as somebody who doesn't have a visual impairment. Did you feel isolated in the visual impairment aspect of your life, or did you have friends who also had visual impairments?
I was sometimes given the opportunity to try to make friendships with people with visual impairments. There was one other boy that was probably 4 grades ahead of me in school in my small district. And so they tried to pair us together as reading partners and things like that. My parents gave me the opportunity to participate in group activities through what's now HHSC in Texas, with other students with a visual impairment. And I did also connect with another student with a visual impairment in high school. But I think that one thing that is hard for us when you are on possibly the higher functioning visual end of visual impairment is that sometimes you can feel out of place everywhere. So sometimes
Yeah.
you can be thrilled to see an activity adapted properly for a child who's blind. But if the population at that activity is primarily blind and not closer to my end of vision, I found that I kind of just felt out of place everywhere in that respect. And that wasn't anything against participating with other kids with lower vision. The pivotal moment for me regarding that was I did, and you'll appreciate this. I attended a week camp after my junior year in high school at Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And so I think that that was probably the most pivotal moment for me to be with visually impaired peers that covered a wide range. I was still on the higher functioning and visually, but I still was able, at that point, I was mature enough to see the ways that we shared challenges regardless of residual vision, and also to, just kind of connect with everybody.
Yeah, and I keep asking these questions about isolation versus community because I see it all the time when we as people, right? I know that I feel this within myself when I feel isolated with something that I'm going through, especially as a teenager and all those hormones and navigating and figuring out who you are, how profound it must have been for you to then work with learners or children or students or whatever you want to call them, who were going to camp, and for you to be empowered to help guide them and to help like give them a place of solace, also while seeing how their community runs and seeing that they children are so resilient, and I think sometimes we forget that we are also that resilient. And when it's our issue, it's one thing, especially as a teenager, but when it's their issue and you're helping them overcome their issues, it can feel really empowering. And so that's why I was bringing that up because, yeah, and you're nodding your head like I can kind of see how that would be such a pivotal moment in your life. So let's go back real quick. You were 15 when you were working there, and then uh, almost around the same time you attended TSBVI. So it was like somewhere around the same time ish in your
Yeah,
life.
it would have been the following summer. So
Yeah.
the Camp Can Do would have been the summer after my sophomore year in high school. And then I
Yeah.
continued on with that, like I said, as a volunteer, but then attending as a student at TSBVI for the week long camp was after my junior year in high school.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you were just really coming into your own at that point too. And it's so interesting that you still decided to pursue business, but then went in and got your master's as a TVI. What was it that made you switch from business to getting your master's? Did you get a job in business as well, or like how did that all work for you? Was it really the volunteer work that nailed it down?
So I first of all chose to major in business because I had a lot of interests, and my thought was that there's a business side of everything. And I think, as you and I
Mhm.
have ended up doing in our lives, being contractors and different things like that, I do actually still have some application for that background. I also come from a family with a small business. So at that point, I wanted to make sure I had potential tools to assist with that also. But as I went through my major,
Yeah.
I was throughout college really focused on volunteer work. And fortunately, I was at Texas A&M University, which has a strong focus on serving others and serving the community. And I was reflecting upon what I would need in a job to feel fulfilled. And so I did a traditional business consulting internship after my junior year in college, and could have received a job offer from them. But I just really felt from that I did truly need that sense of fulfillment through direct service. And so then I went into my volunteer corps wanting to basically test whether that was the route I wanted to go long term.
That's so cool, and I like that you kinda tiptoed into it. You weren't like, "Oh, yes, this is absolutely what I wanna do," and then, maybe would have backpedaled, but really took your time. I know you're presenting at the symposium, but in your however many years of experience, has there been one area in the world of working with learners with visual impairments that you've really honed in and really wanted to focus on?
I have a lot of areas of passion with visual impairment. And so some of those are working with students with multiple disabilities, which is something I've always gravitated toward. Another is assistive technology. I find that I'm able to work my way through and learn pretty well for that. And I just love the way that it empowers our students. I do also have a heart for self advocacy, in particular with our kids who may share similar visual functioning with me. And I'm able to go ahead and offer some of my mistakes up and some of my advice, and we can learn together instead of them feeling by themselves. And then I do truly love Braille. And I have found that the field decided for me what my specialization would be in the last 6 years or so. The reason that I proposed my presentation at the TVI symposium is that if you had a student who was a Braille student at an academic level between pre-K and second, they were coming to whatever district I was at. I am a statistical anomaly, so it just by coincidence, I've had 7 of those learners in the past 6 years, which in an itinerant format, of course, not at a state school, but an itinerant format, that's a high number in one age group.
Yeah.
That's brought me a lot of joy and a lot of challenges. And I'm definitely a better teacher now than I was 6 years ago, and able to be better for my kids that are that age now than I was in the very beginning. But I've also gotten to see those kids that have continued to grow, see them flourish, and I've stayed in close contact with families of students that I don't serve anymore, and it's great to watch them grow up.
Aw, that's so sweet. It's funny that you mentioned that the profession has chosen your expertise for you because, yes, you were given a lot of learners with Braille. But even when you submitted your application for the TVI symposium, you submitted two. One was on magnification programs, and one was on your experience with young Braille learners. And by far, people were like, Braille, Braille. We need this. We need to know your experience. And it's interesting because technology is often a topic that we behind the scenes in the planning committee were like, we need somebody to be able to teach on technology. And you presented both. And then the community was like, no, yes, technology. That sounds great. Okay. Okay. What about this other one? Like pushing it aside, like, here, I need help with young Braille learners. And I love the fact that you're bringing in your own experiences to your presentation. What was one of the challenges that you first faced when working with so many young Braille learners?
Well, I just thought of something I'd like to throw out there. I also, after I learned Braille visually, I taught myself Braille tactually, with the understanding
Mm,
that if I had a lot of Braille students, I had significant concerns about the amount of eye fatigue I would have doing Braille all day, every
mhm.
day. So that has offered a little extra insight for me because it's given me the chance to say, oh, okay, I understand why that skill's so hard. It doesn't seem like it should
Mhm.
be, but I realize how much work we're needing to put into just this one skill, for example, transitioning between lines efficiently and accurately. So I just wanted the group to know that that's part of my mix too. So one of my challenges starting out was that I had unique learners, and at times
Mhm.
progress was slow. It took a lot of shifting to find techniques that met their needs. So morale could be a challenge at times. I will talk
Mhm.
about this in my presentation, but one thing, at one point, myself and my paraprofessional that was providing extra Braille reinforcement, we switched to needing to make a positive note from each session to keep our morale up when we felt like we were stalled. And then it was rewarding to see that as I worked with unique plans for each learner, they were beginning to flourish, and that maybe getting to plan E was still worthwhile, to see someone who was previously not reading just totally blossom and become a reader, or some of those results.
That must have felt really good. Did you also just mention that you have somebody else helping you keep track of your data? Who was that person you said?
So when my son is 6 years old, and when I had my son, I switched to contracting part time.
Uh-huh.
And at the time, I was in
Oh.
Missouri, which, just like everywhere else except worse, doesn't have enough TVIs. So initially, when I was brought on board with the
Mhm.
district, I was committed to being part time, but I had a really wonderful paraprofessional who had already been the one on one and Braille transcriptionist for someone who had gone K through 12 in the district. And so what I did for those, I had young ones at the time. So my Braille, well, most of my Braille kids were young then. So we're talking 3 in pre-K. One was started at third grade with us, but at an academic level, he was still in a pre-K to beginning K academic level. And then we separately also had a high schooler who was learning Braille for future vision loss. So anyway, I to be able to give them appropriate daily reinforcement of those skills, I would roll release sessions to my paraprofessional with directions and or within a curriculum, and she was able to competently provide that reinforcement and make sure that a small district that was had a history of being comparatively rural could still get what they needed for their kids.
That's amazing. Did you find it difficult to role release to the paraprofessional, or was it easy because she had kind of already been in the role?
It was easy because she was very coachable, and we have very much
Mhm.
a peer relationship by my choice. I would take her ideas, always open. She often brought a different perspective and insight. So she really contributed to letting me still have a sense of community, as you talk about on the podcast, and a sounding board and someone to work through problems with. So
Mhm.
at first, when I heard about this idea, I was not so sure, but we got into action with it quite well, quite quickly. So,
That's incredible. And I love the fact that when things seemed like your learners weren't making progress, in order to keep up morale, both of you guys decided to make a positive note. And I'm sure that you looking at the positives with all of your learners made a significant impact for them, because you then were coming into the next session a little bit better, a little bit like more energetic than, oh gosh, this isn't going to work again. This isn't going to work again.
right, definitely, it helps. Sometimes those little things, shift of perspective, no matter how cheesy it may sound, can really make a difference for you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even really it's not that cheesy. It's really our mindset, because you can have something happen and it you get to choose how it's going to affect you, but then how it affects you determines how you show up the next time. And so as the teacher and as the leader in that situation, it seems like you were keeping everybody positive and moving in the right direction, because Braille is really hard. And I like the fact that you mentioned that. And it's not something that is really to be taken lightly. It's a very difficult skill to master.
Right. And one thing that the positive helped particularly with also is that in retrospect, though they were not necessarily diagnosed initially, every one of those 7 students that I am sharing about is neurodivergent in one way or another.
Mm.
And so I particularly appreciate being able to reframe neurodivergence and look at someone who's autistic or ADHD and their strengths, and be positive of that so that we can continue as a team to help that person flourish and appreciate who they are.
Yeah. And gosh, as the student, that must feel so much better to walk into that environment knowing that your teacher and your TA see the best in you, because your students are pushing and they're pushing their hardest on any given day, given whatever biobehavioral state they're in, given, whatever's happening at home, how much they slept, all of that jazz, just like you are. It's not like as though we show up to school for the most part and we're like, we're just not going to try. Give me, put me on the beach somewhere. The students really are trying and they really are working, but it is a really difficult skill. And even on the times that they're not working, they it's typically because something else is going on that we don't know about, or like what you mentioned, there's neurodivergence going on.
Yeah, and that's the my understanding of neurodivergence is the way that I have improved the most over this time span. It happens that my son is neurodivergent, so research became not just for work; it also became for home. And a lot of lessons that I learned for my own family life translated directly to my students. And I was definitely already headed in the right direction with my students and how I handled sensory regulation and behavior and things like that. But there were gaps in my understanding from what I had learned in school and what I had seen in the past to getting to the point where I needed to understand, okay, kids do well when they can. So if we're struggling
Mm-hmm.
here, um, that's not a willfulness. There's something happening, and also understanding fluctuating capacity. I had a student who literally could be reading a building on patterns book, a kindergarten level one, so we're talking 4 or 5 lines, and read a letter
Mm-hmm.
successfully multiple times at the first couple lines. And by the time we were at the last one, she didn't recognize it. And for me, coming from not having that same brain, I did that at first looked like behavior. It was not understandable to me that you literally just read this 1 minute ago and you seem to be focused what is happening. And the challenge with that kiddo was a lot of her anxiety and distraction and what was going on was inward. And she
Mm-hmm.
also had a significant language delay. Disproportionate to her cognition. Her cognition was much more typical than her language was. So I am transparent, with a couple of my parents that love me and appreciate the work I do, but I have acknowledged that I wish I had known some of the things I know now 6 years ago. And that's what we have to learn to do. You learn to do it as a parent, you learn to do it as a teacher. You just improve whenever you can, and you learn to forgive yourself for the things you didn't know you didn't know.
Oh my gosh. There are so many times where I just want to find my first year students, the students I had during my first year. And I'm like, oh, I understand why you bit me. Like, I
Oh,
get it.
yeah.
I'm so sorry. Like, I will take all of that. Like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And that's just kinda how it is, and sometimes I feel really sad that, just at least in education, right, teachers, we get to the point where you and I are, where, like, teaching to me now is second nature. Business, I'm still learning, but teaching, I can show up and I know that even on my worst day, I'm going to be amazingly impactful because it's been so much repetition and because I have been bit so much, or I have been scratched, or I have been like had so many things happen, or I'm like, oh yeah, you guys aren't going to the playground today. You're riding around in a wagon for my cane goals. And like if I get my student out of this wagon, she's gonna take off all of her clothes. So I guess, like I can make that work because that was definitely the situation like in early May. Okay. It definitely showed up. That was happening. And I feel so bad that I'm like, well, 10 years ago, I would not have been able to handle that situation. And in 20 years, I'll be able to handle even more that I can't handle now. But, our learners, I guess, come to us when they come to us, and we just have to forgive ourselves for the mistakes that we make. But it's also really interesting to see our growth. Have you seen the same kind of growth within yourself as a teacher? Like you've gotten better and better at different things. I mean, you mentioned so many different areas that you're fascinated by within this field.
Yeah, I mean, our field is so vast. I say, like many others, that if you ever think you know everything in this field, you need to just go ahead and retire because you don't know everything and you won't know everything even on that last day. and you need an openness to learning. I think that it's important that we build those communities that are non-judgmental when people are needing to learn, when somebody is starting from scratch. So I definitely, for example, started from absolute scratch. This is not within the age, exactly in the age range we've been talking about, but with a fourth grade Braille student, my second year as a TVI, I was starting from scratch with technology with her. She only knew how to keyboard and
Mm.
was blind, and we were starting with a refreshable braille display, and back in the day a netbook with jaws, also iPad skills pretty quickly after that, and iPhone
Good.
skills, iOS skills. But and I always say I put in the blood, sweat, and tears on that one, and now I can do that as second nature mostly. But it really does matter. My student, I'm very blessed that she is now an adult and we are friends. I literally just
Mm.
came from having lunch with her
Aw.
before this podcast, and she specifically calls out that trend, that the foundation in fourth and fifth grade of technology that we were able to lay as something that still helps her be successful in post-secondary education today. So it is a rewarding field. So when that you a lot of times you get to see the beauty of what came from all the blood, sweat, and tears.
Yes, I love that. I love that about working with learners long term, because working at a residential school, the way that things go these days, you get your learners and then the next year about half of your caseload goes away and then you get more and then about half of your caseload goes away. So I got really good at onboarding a new caseload, but what I've seen contract wise now, what you said made me think of one of my students who just graduated from high school, and like we still keep in touch every once in a while. And I love that you can be friends with your learners, and I also love the fact that you were thinking that you weren't doing the best job, but to her it changed her life.
Yeah, that's why when we say that you if you get really down on yourself, you need to remember that if you weren't there, no one would be there, and you are better than nobody.
Mm.
That can sound very snarky and negative. That's not what it is at all. You This role is very unique in how much you can impact a child, and in a lot of scenarios, your half developed skill set is the only thing available to that child. And if you weren't there to offer that half developed skill set, they would be receiving literally zero in that area. So I always, encourage people to think about that sort of perspective.
That is a beautiful perspective. Well, we're getting to about the 30-minute mark, and I want to make sure that we honor everybody's time. Laura, I feel like I could keep talking to you for forever. I think our home lives, our children might have a lot of similarities. You seem like such an awesome person in general. But I want to ask as we wrap up, if you could give one piece of advice to our community to help them take a step forward in becoming a better TVI, O&M, or wherever they are in the field, what would you say?
It's great because this transitions directly from what we just spoke about. So my step forward seems simple. It's believe in yourself and believe in your students. But that believe in yourself means believing that you'll continue to persevere. And as a team with your student, you will eventually find something that works for them. It doesn't mean that you need to believe that you know everything or that you're the perfect person to be supporting them. Just believe in them, that they can continue to achieve more, and that you will find a way to make it happen.
That is absolutely beautiful. I wish someone had told me that many years ago when I was being really hard on myself. Thank you so much for being on this podcast, Laura. I can't wait to learn from you at the TVI Symposium in September.
Thanks. It's been great to talk with you.